This is Creepy, a podcast dedicated to sharing the most famous, chilling, and disturbing creepypastas and urban legends in the world. Whether these stories truly happened or are simply fabrications is for you to decide. These stories may contain graphic depictions of violence and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Creepy presents The Ghosts of the Cooper Evans House, written by William Falo and narrated by Megan McDuffie, Owen McCuen, and Danielle Hewitt. Produced by Steve Blizin.
I wanted to write this down even though nobody will believe it. I know what happened and I will never be the same again, but you must make up your mind if it's true or not. I won't tell you the town's name for fear that somebody will try to find the location, and I would be afraid of what could happen if anyone did. Here is my story. I guided the drone over the old house, searching for anything worth taking a picture of with the onboard camera. The abandoned house looked lifeless, and there didn't appear to be anything worth taking a picture of, so I steered it back toward me. I needed some pictures to sell, since I lost my job due to COVID, and the pictures brought in money. People paid more for shots of wildlife and nature since the virus. I heard rumors of an albino deer in the area that lured me to the Cooper Evans house, but I never saw the rare white one, although I spotted a few deer. The drone got closer when I heard what sounded like a group of cats. I set the drone to hover, and I couldn't see anything on the monitor. It was hard to leave my car on the narrow road near the sewage plant across from the house. It could get hit, and someone might get hurt, so I put the flashers on. I could get a ticket, and I can't afford that. It could get stolen, but it was in such bad shape I doubted it. So I headed into the woods with my drone leading the way. I carried a knife. A woman had to be prepared for anything. I climbed the fence surrounding the property and walked past a no trespassing sign. The house looked peaceful from a distance, but as I got closer, a strange thing happened. A chill overcame me, and the wind picked up. The drone hovered near the front of the house, and I approached the door. I looked around. A trespassing charge would be more expensive than a motor vehicle violation. If this weren't 2020, I wouldn't be taking chances, but with nothing to lose, I continued with the hope of at least finding the albino deer. Things were so tough for me. I considered taking all the sleeping pills I had left more than once. I tried the front door, and it didn't budge. Somebody boarded up the windows and drew a sad face on one of them. And the strange thing is that when I looked at it, sadness overwhelmed me. It was a bad omen, and I should have gotten out of there. I heard a shriek and almost jumped out of my skin. A raccoon stared at me. I stared back at it, then lowered the drone for a shot. Nobody paid for a raccoon picture, but I liked the bandits. But this one was different. It threw a pine cone at me and hit my eye. You don't have to believe me, but it happened. I yelled, "You stupid bandit!" After rubbing my eye, it was gone. I looked at my reflection on my cell phone and saw a black circle under one of my eyes. I looked like a raccoon. How did it throw a pine cone? Worst yet, I missed the shot. Noises came from the barn, and I headed that way, despite something inside me telling me to leave. My vision was a little blurry now, and I stumbled a few times. The dizziness increased as I reached the barn. I opened the door, and it creaked louder than I wanted. I stepped inside and saw a lot of cats. Most of them hissed at me, and I stepped back and shut the door. One small cat squeezed out of the door before it closed. I backed away, and it followed me. Then I tripped over an old log, and darkness found me. When I opened my eyes, the cat was staring at me. I got my phone out, but there was no service. I spun around and couldn't believe it was almost night. Something flashed on the house's second-floor window, but that was impossible. It was boarded up. The drone crashed in the field behind the house. Cats poured out of a hole in the barn's wall, heading into the woods, looking like an army going to war. But the one that snuck out stayed with me. "I'm Molly," I said, still afraid to pet it. I needed to retrieve the drone. There was no way to replace it. I could never afford another one. I walked behind the house while chills ran up my spine. Someone was watching me, and it wasn't a cat. I could feel eyes on me coming from the house, and I spun around so fast the cat ran a short distance away. There was nobody there, and I ran to the drone. It was in pieces, and right next to it was a broken-up headstone. I fell over backward and crawled away like an upside-down crab. What was happening here? I wanted to get away, but I needed the drone. Courage, Molly. I checked my phone. No reception. I couldn't send an emergency alert. I would be in trouble. I scooped up the drone and saw the name on the headstone. My name was on it. The date of death was today. I rubbed my eyes as a red fox darted past me. Was I hallucinating? The darkness came so fast, it was like someone flipped a light switch on the world. I stumbled away from the headstone, carrying the drone like a baby. I was defenseless. My hands shook too much to use the knife in my pocket. The raccoon rubbed its little hands together like it was satisfied by what it did to my eye. I reached the front of the house, and the door was open. I walked faster, and once I was far enough away, I looked toward the house and saw a man looking back at me. He pointed to the creek. I don't know why, but I followed his direction, and when I turned around, somebody shut the door. Near the creek, I gasped. Bones. I shivered. I dropped the drone and ran, then climbed the fence and reached my car. There was a ticket on the windshield. I jumped in and heard a purring sound. The cat that stuck by me was in the passenger seat. How could it be there? It was impossible. And then I noticed the passenger side window was open. I knew that I wouldn't leave it open. I turned the key. Please start. The car started, and I drove away. In my apartment, the cat stayed with me, like it belonged there. My black eye reminded me of the crazy raccoon. I reported the bones to the police. Fortunately, they didn't arrest me. The next day, they called and said they didn't find any bones and warned me about trespassing. I gathered my courage and went back to retrieve the drone. Despite the police telling me not to go there, I climbed the fence but stayed away from the house. I quickly searched the surrounding area, but there was no headstone, and I looked everywhere. The cats remained hidden, the raccoon was nowhere to be found, but I pictured him rubbing his greedy little hands together while he watched me. There were no bones. The only evidence of me even being there was the cat who stayed with me, and she couldn't talk. I hoped not, anyway. I got out of there, convinced something dark happened there in the past. I would need to do further research, but might never find out exactly what happened there. Inside, I changed. After seeing my name on a headstone, I wanted to live more than ever before. I found happiness in the small things that I took for granted. I volunteered to help people whenever I could. I contacted other family members I avoided in the past. I never took more than one sleeping pill, and the suicidal thoughts stayed away. seeing your name on a headstone changes you. I became obsessed with the game Animal Crossing. An orange cat in the game named Tangy always made me laugh. I even took a job delivering food, and Spooky came with me, despite it being against the rules. Yes, I named the cat Spooky. The name fit, maybe even too well. I always wore my mask and stayed socially distant, and I slowly got better. Delivering food was hectic due to COVID, and the restaurant I worked at closed for good, so there was no going back there. The driving strained my old car, and the contactless deliveries kept me isolated, except for Spooky by my side. The calls kept coming, and a few workers called out after coming in contact with a COVID-positive person. I did everything, including answering the phone, online deliveries, and the drop-offs. I received one online message that said the delivery was urgent. Somebody needed a pizza immediately. Nobody needed pizza that badly, but the promise of a big tip made me rush. When I knocked on the door, I heard a scream. I knocked again, and a male's voice yelled out,
"Leave it. We wanted a contactless delivery."
I put it down, then heard, "Help!" I hesitated, then tried the doorknob. It was locked. I put my mask on and went to a side door, and it was unlocked. I got out my knife, and inside saw a man wrestling with a woman. "Get away from her,"
Who are you?
he yelled at me. The pizza delivery driver.
Leave the pizza and get out.
I pointed my knife at him while I held out my phone with the other hand. I hoped he didn't have a gun. "I'm calling 911. He looked at the knife and shook his head. He was thinking of charging me. I glared at him, and he dropped the woman and marched out the front door. I made sure he didn't take my car and saw Spooky looking out the front window. The man kept going down the street. The woman cried as I ran around, locking the doors. She put on a mask and hugged me as I backed away. "You ordered the pizza to get help."
Yes. He let me do that. I hoped somebody would come that could help me.
That was smart. We waited for the police in awkward silence until she started pacing around the room.
I'm finished with men.
She said, "You better press charges on that one."
Do you have a boyfriend?
"No, I have a cat." I sounded proud of it.
You don't go out with men.
I didn't want to have this conversation now. No, maybe. I'm not sure who or what I like.
I'm Amber.
She said. "Molly."
You're a hero.
"No, I'm not. I'm no hero." I stayed with her until the police came. I hoped they didn't remember me from the missing bones call, but they eyed me suspiciously. After I gave a statement, I got out of there, but not before Amber pried my phone number out of me. I never expected to hear from her again, but she called, again and again. I hated it at first, but then something happened, and I worried when she stopped calling me. I started calling her. I didn't have friends. I didn't want any after so many awful school experiences and afterward, both by boys and girls. But Amber grew on me. On a rainy night, I told her my ghost experience. I risked our friendship. She might think I'm crazy. She might never call me again, but something unexpected happened. We became better friends. Friends were a giant leap for me since I was broken inside, and the repairs would take a long time. Everything I did seemed to end up in some kind of drama. I rented a drone and headed to the woods, far away from the Cooper Evans house in another state. I needed to take more pictures to sell. Delivering pizza wasn't enough to pay my rent and other bills. I guided the drone toward 3 fox kits. There was no sign of the mother. I snapped many photos and then directed it back toward me until I saw someone looking up at the drone. Flying a drone in a national park was illegal. A roar made me pause, and on the drone's video, I saw a bear crash into the ranger. They tumbled to the ground. "Help!" the ranger called out. I dropped the controller and ran toward him with my bear spray out. I ran straight into the area. The bear stopped and stepped toward me. Its shadow covered me in darkness, and I froze. The ranger moaned, and the bear turned back toward the ranger. "Stop! Come after me instead!" The bear turned, and I sprayed at its eyes. I tried to swat it away, but the spray covered its face. It roared and lumbered away. I hurried to the ranger, then grabbed the radio. "Help!" I read his name tag. "Ranger Mike was attacked by a bear and needs medical help." I knew they would follow the GPS signal. The ranger grabbed my wrist.
You're the drone pilot. I need to write you a citation.
His voice trailed off.
What's your name?
"Molly."
What?
I lowered my mask. "Molly."
I'm Mike.
He closed his eyes. The silence of the woods made me shiver. The bear could come back. The pain in my chest intensified. I fought back a panic attack, then wiped the blood off his face. He opened his eyes.
You're still here.
"I wouldn't leave you alone."
Thank you.
2 men arrived with medical bags. They wore masks, and I pulled mine back on to protect me from the virus and hide my face. One called for a helicopter while they frantically worked on the ranger. I faded into the woods unnoticed and threw up under a pine tree. When I drove away, I saw a dead fox. It could be the mother. The 3 fox kits would spend the night alone. I knew they would be terrified. I knew I would be too. I spent the night wondering about the ranger and the fox kits and worried about how I could go forward without a drone. My only escape was Animal Crossing. I fell asleep with the game by my head and often woke up by 2 wolves, an angry squirrel, or the sassy Tangy wandering through my make-believe island. I jumped up and turned the game off. The fox kits might be out there alone. I gathered the courage to go back to the woods, found the fox kits, and put them in a crate. They tried to scratch me and succeeded a few times before I corralled them into the crate. I avoided the spot where the bear attack occurred. I couldn't face the scene or any police investigating the attack. I kept my eyes open. The bear could still be nearby, and it might remember me. The wildlife center took the fox kits, and I petted each one goodbye. I read online that the ranger would survive without serious injury. He stated that he wanted to find a drone pilot named Molly who saved his life. He promised he wouldn't give her a citation. I knew he would still be here on my way back. Would he give me a ticket? I might call the hospital and find out. Maybe even do a virtual visit. I smiled for a second. Either way, I now needed to pay for the rental drone. The bills and trouble kept coming. I might have another friend now, but the cost was hurting me. Was it worth it? Maybe. In any case, the house still haunted me. And then I got a call my drone was fixed. When I got the drone back, there was only one picture on the camera. A white deer stood in an open field. I couldn't retrieve any other photos. Through research, I discovered that the house was built on burial ground for the Lenape Indians. I couldn't find any details. The location was vague, and my research was hampered by COVID. Everything was closed, and I feared walking in the woods because the possibility of something happening. I was a magnet for trouble, whether it was a bear or ghosts. I visited my mother and father's gravesite during a cold rain and saw a shadow in the distance. Could the man at the house follow me? If I saw a raccoon, I might run screaming into the office. I started to think I needed to see a therapist, but how could I tell them about the house? They would put me away. I got the strength to follow the shadow into the mausoleum and saw it turn a corner. Chills ran down my spine, but I kept going. until the shadow ended up disappearing into a small chapel. I saw electric candles there and put some dollars in and lit 2 for my parents. When I walked out, I looked back and they were both off. The wind blew through my hair and I stumbled through the graves trying to get back to my car. The rain intensified and I took out my phone and called Amber. I tripped over a marker and hit my head, saw yellow eyes in the darkness. I heard my name and looked down. My name was on a headstone. It was the same house, and the man pointed at the creek again. I couldn't move. He called out. The yellow eyes penetrated my soul, and a cat screeched. I crawled until I reached the creek. In the water was a blue ribbon. I grasped it and collapsed in the water. A hand grabbed my shoulder and pulled me up.
Molly.
My vision was distorted. My eyes stung, and water dripped off me. I coughed up water for a long time. Amber, I mumbled.
Are you okay?
No. Yes. I looked in my hand and saw it was empty.
Let's get you to the hospital.
No, home. I was afraid they would lock me up. Please, no. I grabbed Amber's hand so hard her skin turned white.
Okay, but I'm staying with you.
We left my car and called the office. We would get it soon. Amber helped me get washed up, gave me clean clothes, covered me with blankets, and gave me a warm cup of hot chocolate. I told her what happened. After a debate, I agreed to call the ranger and told him about the blue ribbon. He agreed to look into it since I saved him from the bear. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. I felt safe with Amber. It was something I never knew before. The ranger called back and he convinced the local police to search the creek. They found a blue ribbon and believed it belonged to a missing girl. Her name was Melody, but she was never found. They hoped the blue ribbon would help find her. I cried. Another sad thing that haunted me. I got spooky and stayed with Amber for a few days, except for work. I shivered at shadows and jumped at unknown sounds, but I was tough and would not let it stop me. The ranger checked up on me a few times and promised to visit. It seemed like many bad things happened to me, but I found a close friend, another friend who may get closer, and a cat named Spooky. It's a pretty good trade. Yet, sometimes, a nagging thought works its way into my subconscious, that maybe I imagined the whole thing and that I'm losing my mind. Whenever that happens, I find Spooky the cat, and I know that she is very real. Despite her sometimes getting angry at me for petting her too much, she forces me to face reality. I avoided that road and refused to tell anyone about that day and night except for Amber. I'm not sure if I could ever tell the ranger about the house and how it haunted me. He may think I'm crazy. I can't let that happen. I can't let people know what happened. Only Amber. I framed the picture of the white deer and wondered if it somehow saved me. Or maybe the cat did. I didn't know, but I think I could have died. So when people say goodbye to 2020, I will join in for a special reason. I will be happy to be alive in 2021. You can refuse to believe this story, and that's okay. The only proof I have is a cat that became attached to me for some unknown reason, but Spooky isn't speaking. I won't tell anyone about the location. If something happened to them, I could never forgive myself. If you look for the house and see an army of cats, or a raccoon rubbing his hands together, or a man at the door pointing in the distance, please stay away. I beg you. You never want to see your name on a headstone. You will never be able to forget it. Believe me, I know. What haunts me now is that I recently heard about plans to restore the house. and that's why I'm still afraid.
For more information, including pictures and videos of the stories told on this podcast, please visit creepypod.com. If you'd like to submit a story for consideration or recommend a story, please see our submission page at creepypod.com/submissions. All stories told on this podcast are done so through Creative Commons Share-alike licensing or with written consent from the authors. No portion of this podcast may be rebroadcast or otherwise distributed without the express written consent of the Creepy Podcast production team and the story's author.
The Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network, home of Creepy, for disturbing and terrifying creepypastas. SCP Archives, with full cast storytelling, horror queers, genre commentary from the LGBTQ perspective. The Boo Crew, for horror-centric interviews. Listen free wherever you stream audio and at bloodydisgusting.com/podcasts.